the French. No army in the world could stand this rate of loss. The proud German army was breaking up in the field. There could be no doubt about the outcome of the armistice negotiations. The London Times wrote,
"All the world awaits with eager desire the news that Germany has taken the next step towards peace. There is but one way, and every hour that she delays to take it increases her losses and her dangers. The terms have been irrevocably fixed. They are to take or leave within a definite period."
At Compiègne, the drama was played out. The German armistice delegation entered Foch's railway carriage.
Foch invited them to be seated on one side of the table and sat down opposite them. "Do you request an armistice?" the Marshal asked abruptly. "Yes. We are here to ask that an armistice be concluded," they replied together.
The terms were read out amid complete silence. One of the German delegates wept. The Germans were given 72 hours in which to reach a decision. They did not need so long. Revolution was sweeping through the cities of Germany. On November the 9th, the Kaiser abdicated, and the next day he fled to Holland. Hearing the news, Sir Douglas Haig wrote in his diary,
"If the war had gone against us, no doubt our king would have had to go, and probably our army would have become insubordinate like the German army. Compare John Bunyan's remark on seeing a man on his way to be hanged. But for the grace of God, John Bunyan would have been in that man's place."
At 5 a.m. on November the 11th, the armistice was signed, and a signal went out from Marshal Foch's headquarters to all the Allied armies.
"Hostilities will cease at 1100 hours today, November the 11th.
Now, at last, on the 100th day of the 5th year, the guns fell silent. The killing stopped.
No more very lights going up with their greenish, wavering flare. No lilies of the dead in the night. No flash of howitzers on the horizon. No downward droning of the shells. No machine guns. No patrols going out. Just nothing. Silence.
The Canadians were approaching Mons.
And we carried on into Mons and got to the main street, which was filled with the inhabitants, screaming their heads off and shouting. I didn't seem to know what had happened to them. And as I got to the town hall in the main street of Mons, the church clocks chimed. It was 11 o'clock.
The war was over. This was the unbelievable moment, and nowhere more unbelievable than at the front itself.
Slowly, the news came in officially that an armistice had been signed, but there was no show of emotion. No one went berserk or anything like that. We were too far gone. I mean, say, the perceptions, our emotions were all killed long ago.
A French officer observed the reaction of his soldiers.
They didn't show their joy outwardly by shouts or songs, as one could have expected. They kept talking about it among themselves, but remained remarkably composed and dignified. Actually, peace had come so suddenly that we were all rather stunned, asking ourselves whether it was possible or whether we were dreaming. Walking along the trenches several hours after the armistice, I was surprised to see all our soldiers at their listening posts or in their shelters, as if the war was still on.
The more boisterous Americans responded differently to the occasion.
In one artillery unit, the men joined hands in a long line behind the gun. As the captain dropped his arm, they all pulled in unison, so each could say he had fired the last shell.
In many British sectors, stern fighting went on until the very last minute.
There'd been one German machine gun unit giving our troops a lot of trouble, and they kept on firing until practically 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, the officer stepped out of their position, stood up, lifted his helmet and bowed to the British troops, fell all his men in the open in front and marched them off.
British soldiers watched with astonishment as civilians in the liberated areas dug up in their gardens clothes, money, and valuables which had been hidden for years. For these people, November the 11th, 1918, meant the end of enemy rule, the end of repression and fear.
If there are endless miles of ruins, there are thousands of beaming faces. Wounded filtering back from the front, old men and women, and then grandchildren, huddled with the remains of their possessions on a creaking cart drawn by a lame old horse, returning perhaps to heaps of ruins which they may still fondly claim as home. One and all bear the stamp of trials bravely borne.
For some, the armistice had another meaning. An English officer heard stories of a different kind of fear.
Of how, from want, because the children were hungry, to provide medicine for a sick baby or to save an invalid mother from starvation, the girl or the wife had lived with a German officer or NCO. With men, their men were fighting. Sometimes there was a child by this stranger, and you felt the unhappy mother did not dare say, could not explain that she loved this one also. And I, the Englishman, thank God that my country had not been invaded.
The November day wore on. The truth, the wonderful, incredible truth, sank in. The war really was over. A British officer wrote,
Throughout the night, the noise of singing, the shrill hooting of railway whistles, and the blast of factory sirens might awaken the dead. At last I lie down, tired and very happy, but sleep is elusive. Incidents flash through the memory. The battles of the first 4 months. The awful winters in waterlogged trenches, cold and miserable. The terrible trench war assaults and shell fire of the next 3 years. Loss of friends, exhaustion and wounds. Thank God. The end of a frightful 4 years at the front. Company officers, rank and file, together with other frontline units, have suffered bravely, patiently, and unselfishly hardships and perils beyond even the imagination of those, including soldiers, who have not shared them.
To the soldiers of all his armies, Marshal Foch addressed an order of the day.
Officers, non-commissioned officers, and soldiers of the Allied armies, you have won the greatest battle in history and rescued the most sacred of all causes, the liberty of the world. You have full right to be proud, for you have crowned your standards with immortal glory and won the gratitude of posterity.
On the other side of the line, Field Marshal von Hindenburg led the defeated German army home to a country bitterly divided, where children were dying of hunger, where mobs attacked officers in the streets, where the soldiers